In the kitchen, Becky makes coffee and talks to her friend Emily on the phone. While adding sugar, she mentions not worrying about a woman stopping her from seeing a great guy she's dated. Suddenly dizzy, she drops the mug and stumbles before falling. Becky realizes someone spiked her sugar, so she crawls away. But a stranger appears, covering her mouth and nose until she dies. Then, they put a medicine canister on the counter to make it look like Becky took her own life. Days later, Amber Deschanel shows up at the Simon house for the au pair interview. Brian Simon opens the door, and she apologizes for being late because of traffic. She doesn't expect them to consider her after the bad first impression, but wants to explain. Surprisingly, Brian welcomes her in and says they can fit her in between other candidates. In the kitchen, Amber meets Brian's wife, Elise, and they start the interview. She mentions studying nursing in college, but ended up in the hospital due to student debts. She clarifies she doesn't work as an au pair for money. Then she gives them a paper with her previous employer's info as a reference, mentioning the Falcons at Colson Lake. When they hear their son crying, Elise goes to check on him. Brian asks where Amber's from, and she says Canada, but loves living in the U.S. They joke about her not being able to be president, and they share a flirtatious moment. Seconds later, she returns with Cody and introduces him to Amber. After finishing the interview, Elise tells Amber she'll call her regarding any updates. In bed, Elise admits she liked Amber out of all the candidates, but Brian suggests they call the references first before making a decision. Elise remarks on Amber's beauty, and Brian adds she's plain looking, but he's okay with hiring her if Elise is comfortable. So, Elise agrees to call the references. They all give glowing reviews about Amber. The next day, Amber arrives early and finds Brian working out in the garage. He tells her Elise and Cody are at their self-defense group and helps with her luggage. Amber comments on the room size, mentioning her previous apartment in New York. Brian, confused, thought she lived in Colson, so she quickly corrects herself. Elise arrives and takes Brian to see a hidden nanny cam in a picture frame. That night, Elise has a nightmare of seeing Amber watching them in bed, but it's just a dream. The next day, at her art gallery, Elise tells her friend Lori they hired a nanny. Lori's glad Elise is moving on from Brian's infidelity, saying he's still better than most men, even if he cheated. All of a sudden, Mr. Dutros shows up to remind the ladies about his offer to buy the building they're renting. He wants to turn it into apartments. Elise still says no, so before he leaves, he warns them that he'll be angry. Later, at the playground, Elise suggests delaying the party at their house until the new nanny gets used to things. But Brian thinks it'll be fun to have someone else look after Cody while they have fun. During the party, the mom gets drinks from the fridge and gets startled when she sees Amber looking back at her through the window. She goes back to the table where Vance and Brian talk about their boss, Catherine Parsons, who they call the Ice Queen. Vance goes to the bathroom and flirts with Amber, but she isn't interested and walks away. Outside, Vance tells the group he met the new nanny, and when Lori warns him to stay away from Amber, he says she isn't his type while giving Brian a look. The next day, the nanny says she'll put Cody to bed, and the mom thanks her for doing a good job. Then, she asks her to get Cody's clothes ready for the next day. After Amber leaves, the mom takes the SD card from the nanny cam and watches the day's footage in the bedroom. Later that night, the nanny watches a news report about Becky's case, which the authorities now think is murder. Suddenly, Brian comes in and asks what she's watching. She says it's the news, which she finds scary because of all the bad things happening lately. When Brian says he's going to bed, Amber offers to make him a drink, and he agrees. They keep talking on the couch, and she asks if he always works late. Brian explains that he has to, especially after landing the virtue at a count. Amber mentions meeting Vance at the party, and Brian apologizes for his co-worker's behavior. He says Vance is the kind of guy most women find interesting, but Amber disagrees, saying he's actually unappealing. Brian finds her perspective refreshing, and Amber admits she isn't as innocent as she seems. Later, Brian quietly joins his wife in bed, unaware she's still awake. Meanwhile, the nanny listens at the bedroom door to make sure the couple is asleep before going to her room to call someone she needs to see urgently. The nanny meets her friend Jax at a diner and admits she's struggling to resist being attracted to the child's dad. Jax, feeling frustrated, tells her she can't keep doing the same thing, hinting that Amber has a history of getting involved with married clients. Jax asks if she's still taking her medication, and Amber confirms she is. Amber eventually apologizes for unloading her problems onto Jax and asks how she's doing. Jax mentions she's still house-sitting for the same client and enjoys it because she usually has the house to herself. The next day, Catherine Parsons tells Brian that Virtue Ed insisted only one person lead their account, so she chose Vance. Brian is furious, arguing he landed the account and should be in charge. Catherine defends her choice, saying Vance developed a good relationship with the client. Later, Elise can't believe Brian's boss's decision. She asks if Vance is okay with it, and Brian says Vance only cares about himself. Brian calls Amber to take Cody to his room so he doesn't hear their argument. Elise wants Brian to go back to the office and talk to his boss, but Brian grabs his car keys and says he's going for a drive to clear his head. After spending hours at a bar, Brian comes home drunk and finds the nanny still awake. Brian, feeling the effects of alcohol, kisses the nanny, and she kisses back. But she stops him, worried about losing her job if Elise finds out. Brian assures her she won't. They go to her room, and as Amber removes her top, her charm bracelet falls to the floor. They move to the bed and become intimate. The next day, in the kitchen, the nanny kisses Brian and tells him Elise and Cody have left. Brian pushes her away, admitting he enjoyed their time together, but insisting it can't happen again. Feeling rejected, Amber locks herself in her room and calls Jax on her secret phone, needing someone to talk to. Later, Vance tells Brian he didn't decide Brian's demotion. Feeling betrayed, Brian says he wouldn't have treated Vance the same way. Vance suggests Brian's reluctance to be ruthless cost him the position. Brian watches as Vance flirts with Catherine outside his office, suspecting Vance secured the account by flattering their boss. That evening, Vance waits in a motel room for the courtesan he hired. Soon, there's a knock on the door, and when he opens it, he's surprised to see someone wearing a pink wig. He seems to recognize them. The person stabs Vance in the stomach, and he staggers back into the room. The next day, Detectives Bennett and Scalise arrive at the Simon house, asking the couple to come to the station for questioning. At the station, they show Brian a security camera picture of a woman in a wig, and he notices the bracelet on her wrist, similar to Amber's. But Brian doesn't tell the detectives about this detail. The cops mention talking to Catherine, who mentioned Brian's argument with the victim. Brian admits he's still upset about losing the account, but denies any involvement in the murder. That night, while watching TV, Amber surprises Brian by sitting on his lap and kissing him. He pushes her away, telling her to stop. Amber threatens to tell Elise, knowing she won't believe Brian because of his history of cheating. Frustrated, Brian goes back to bed. At the gallery, Elise and Lori meet with their lawyer, Chalfie, who warns them to be cautious, dealing with a powerful enemy like Mr. Dutros. Soon after, Amber and Cody arrive, so Elise leaves the meeting early to spend time with her son. After they leave, Chalfie tells Lori he's surprised Elise hired an attractive nanny despite her husband's behavior. The next day, Elise gets a call from her business partner about vandalism at the gallery. They believe it's Mr. Dutros' doing, but the cop notices the word painted across one piece is singular, puzzling because there are two of them. Elise asks what they should do, and the officer promises to handle their case promptly. Meanwhile, Mr. Dutros visits a junkyard as a potential site for his rental properties. He senses someone following him, but gets no response when he calls out. As he's about to get in his car, someone slashes his throat with a knife. At the police station, Detective Bennett calls Brian in, because both people causing problems for him and his wife have turned up dead. However, they let him go due to lack of evidence to hold him. At the playground, Brian is about to confess to Elise about his encounter with the nanny. But Elise interrupts, mentioning how Amber seems to never sleep. She says she hears Amber in her room at night, or sometimes finds her room empty. Brian says Amber is an adult and can do what she wants when she's off duty. When Elise brings up what Brian wanted to tell her earlier, he suggests they discuss it later. That night, the couple watches the nanny cam feed, waiting for Amber to leave. Elise follows Amber to a house, where she sees her knocking on the door until a woman lets her in. Elise listens in on a conversation between Amber and Jax, where Amber complains about her attraction to married clients despite wanting a normal life. Elise returns home, puts away her necklace, and tells Brian that Amber was just visiting a friend. The next day, Elise goes back to the house and talks to Jax. She asks for information about Amber, explaining it's for her family's safety. Inside, Jax explains that she and Amber grew up in the same orphanage because Amber's family died in a car crash. Seeing Elise's confusion, Jax mentions she thought Amber had told her employer this before being hired. Jax also reveals that Amber had an inappropriate relationship with her foster father. Elise thanks Jax and promises not to tell Amber about their conversation. After Jax leaves, Someone knocks on her door, but when she checks, nobody's there. Then she notices the patio doors are open, and suddenly, someone incapacitates her with a taser from behind. Meanwhile, Elise calls the nanny's reference again, but hears a phone ringing from another room. She follows the sound to the nanny's room and finds a secret phone in the door. Surprised, she calls Brian and tells him that Amber faked her references. Elise believes Amber asked her friends to pretend to be former clients and give positive reviews. Elise asks Brian to come home so they can confront the nanny together. Later, Amber and Cody come over. The mother takes Cody to his room. In the kitchen, the nanny spots her phone on the counter and realizes the woman knows she lied on her resume. When Elise returns, Amber tries to explain, but the mother doesn't want to hear it. Elise accuses her of killing Vance and Mr. Dutros and says she's going to jail. When the nanny tries to leave, Ellison knocks her out using her self-defense training. Then she tries to strangle the nanny, but Brian stops her. While the couple is distracted, Amber gets up and runs away. At the station, the police tell the couple that everything the nanny said about her background was a lie. With all the evidence, they suspect Amber committed the murders. 6 months later, Brian is planting new plants in the backyard. While digging, he finds his wife's jewelry box buried in the dirt. Inside, he sees Amber's charm bracelet. Elise admits she was behind everything. She picks up the bracelet and says adding it to her disguise was a clever move since it made the nanny look guilty. Elise confesses to killing Vance because he stole Brian's account, and she believes Mr. Dutros deserved what happened to him. Then, Elise confesses she also killed Becky, the woman Brian had feelings for. She admits feeling remorse only for killing Jax, but she couldn't risk leaving any loose ends. Brian accuses Elise of ruining Amber's life by framing her for the crimes. Elise says she knew Amber was the perfect scapegoat from the start. When Brian asks what to do next, Elise presents 2 options: tell the police the truth and ruin their family, or go along with her plan for a perfect life. Later, Brian gives Detective Bennett the bracelet, claiming he found it while cleaning out the nanny's room. Detective Scalise informs his partner that the judge signed the arrest warrant for the Simons. When Brian returns home, he finds an envelope addressed to him and his wife. Inside is a USB flash drive, which Elise plugs into her laptop. They're surprised to find a video from Amber, revealing she knew about the nanny cam all along. The nanny says she suspected Elise, just like Elise suspected her. When they were together, Vance and Mr. Dutros died, and she realized Elise's plan to blame her. So she changed the thumb drive on the nanny cam. Amber says she only learned about Jax's murder weeks later, and witnesses saw a woman in a black hoodie leaving the house. After watching the nanny cam footage, she saw Elise returning to the house in a black hoodie around the time of her friend's estimated time of death. Then, she tells that she sent Elise's hair and the video to the police, thinking it'll match the DNA at the crime scene. Elise hears the police sirens nearing the house, shocked that the nanny had outsmarted her.